Okay, by 11. We're going to finish off phylum Arthropoda by talking about the insects. There's a few things that remain where we have to talk about how they metamorphosize. Some of these critters will look totally different by the time we're done. Some will look the same as they go through the stages. This isn't a long topic, so I'll go through it a little quicker this time. You guys have asked me to be briefer, so I will. Okay, so what we're looking at with class Insecta is a huge group. I've said that arthropods comprise 95% of animals on the planet. That's exactly dead on. It's huge. And when you look at Mother Nature, she must have gotten excited about beetles because there are more varieties of beetles, more orders of beetles than you can almost shake a stick at. Now, to be an insect, you have to have 6 legs and a head, thorax, and abdomen. I get that. To be an arachnid, you'll have a cephalothorax, right, where the head and the thorax are together and fused, and then you'll have to have an abdomen plus 8 legs. Insects are a tremendous benefit. They can also be a tremendous pain. What am I talking about? Termites. If you lived in California, you fight a constant battle against these things as they affect your house, literally trying to eat it. Oops, go back. There we go. So, here we go. On a test, you would have to know that insects have these body regions. That's testable. Down here, head, this region, thorax, which is sort of like your chest, we have the same thing, and abdomen. Interesting that I mentioned that we have similar body regions. We totally do. And there's a degree of relation. As evolution moved on, the head tended to go towards the front. The thorax became sort of our middle region, and we do have an abdominal region. We've also added pelvic. For example, in females, the uterus, a lot of the reproductive organs, are sort of in the pelvic cavity. All right, let's kick on here. So what you have to have to be in Arthropoda at all, it's all about the exoskeleton. And that exoskeleton is comprised of chitin. It's sort of a tough yet flexible carbohydrate. Having an exoskeleton creates a couple of issues because if you're going to have an exoskeleton, how are you going to flex your joints? Well, you'll have to have jointed appendages, which is what they're saying here. And then you have to consider the whole problem of as you grow, it's not the bones inside your body that grow. Instead, it's your exoskeleton. So we see with a lot of arthropods that they have to molt in order to get bigger. Typical insect, we'll just lay it out here. You'll see that they have antennae, they have compound eyes. And by compound eyes, let's do a little drawing here. If you look at them closely enough, they're made up of these little tiny facets. And you can see that here, all these little sort of crystals, and you see what look like fine hairs sticking up. Some people think that their vision is kaleidoscopic vision. They think that they see multiple copies of you. They don't see multiple copies of you. Instead, what they're seeing, apparently I'm supposed to do some grade 1 math. I've had that for a while since my daughters have had fun on the iPad, so it reminds them to do their math, like a built-in little teacher, isn't it? These facets that are on the compound eye, which is here, okay, so here's our compound eye right there, they're very good at light detection. It's like looking through a stained glass window. You don't see multiple objects on the other side. The object that you're looking at is just broken into sort of a cracked mosaic. And if any part of it moves, well, each part sort of illuminates, and it really draws the attention of the bug. I don't know about you, but when you go to swat a fly, roll up the old newspaper and go after them, they seem to have almost a sixth sense. They know you're coming. Well, they have an advantage. They have way better motion detection than we do. They also have, a little bit harder to see here, you'll find that they have little sort of small little eyes that are just simple light detectors. These are called ocelli. Now, the ocelli are just simple Light detection, they just see whether or not you've gone through a light period or a dark period. And these flashes of light also help them to increase their survival. They know whether or not they're in the light or in the dark. If they want to detect motion and if they want to detect color, they'll use their compound eyes. There are 2 pairs of wings on the thorax. Now, some people have a hard time envisioning that, but what I'll say is if you look at a dragonfly, for example, a dragonfly, you'll see the 2 sets of wings going off the body, and then it becomes pretty obvious. These guys have wings where they can be adapted. They may have a wing covering, and then the wings underneath. Okay, but we're still talking about 2 pairs of wings, and it's on the thorax. Okay, you don't find it anyplace else. In fact, when you look at their body parts, their legs, everything comes off the thorax. And it's not really that much different with us. We just have a better developed pelvic region. So many lenses that detect tiny changes in color, light, and movement. It's pretty neat what these guys can do. Their brain has to disassemble all that information. So just a sec here. I'm just going to pop out. I'll show you something. When you consider what insects see, insect vision. Let's just jump onto the web for a second because I hadn't loaded this. Here we go. This is what Hollywood thought, and they misled us all, that we would somehow see multiple versions of things. Okay, if they're looking at a car, this is what we see. This would be like what they see. Sorry for the zoom, but the picture's not big enough. Kaleidoscopic. If you take a look at the Mona Lisa, that's, for example, what they would see. Insect color vision, when they look at plants, warrants mentioning, because when insects look at plants, insects can see in a different color spectrum. You've heard of Roy G. Biv, right? And that sort of ends at violet. If you go past violet, you get into what's called ultraviolet. So let's go to insect vision. There we go. So they can see in a different spectrum than we can. So some of these pictures are extremely interesting. The insect, for example, in this photo, and I'll zoom in, sorry. The insect is guided towards the nectar, and they'll burrow down in there, and if you think about bees, they're heading down towards that sweet nectar. They want to make honey, they take it back to the hive. They're doing this because it's almost like they have guides. The plant is showing them where sort of the good stuff is, and the insect will simply follow it. So we would see the plant on the left, that's just Roy G. Biv vision, but since insects can see past violet, they see all sorts of different stuff. And it's tremendous. Great examples of exactly what insects would see. I love these. I remember my professor showing these off, right? Here's us, here's them. And they're really interested in this darker region here. Very cool stuff. Okay, pop back out. Go. So they have an ability to see colors that we don't. Light detection that exceeds our ability. Go. Give this a second to catch up. So they're very responsive to stimuli. Helps them to stay alive. They've evolved that way. They also have these really cool adaptations, these mouth parts. You're looking at a moth here, and they've got what's called proboscis. It's all coiled up like a tube, but when they want to feed on nectar, they just unravel it, and it's basically like a flexi straw that they stick down into a plant. So you can sort of say they're herbivorous. I guess that's a fair thing to say. Depending on their mode of feeding, if you think about it, a mosquito has a needle-like proboscis for sucking blood out of us. These guys have a flexible hose-like proboscis so that the moth can feed on the nectar. And yet again, other insects, if they're carnivores, will have bitey, piercy mouth parts. So this is Darwin at work. They're adapted for their environment. I'll just move up here. I'm at school recording this, so the network's a little bit slow. The specialized mouth parts, see if this advances to my friend the ant here. When you look at an ant, especially an ant like a carpenter ant or something like that, its mouth parts are adapted for rending and shearing. And when you think about ants, they'll be omnivores. They could also be carnivores. There we go. And they'll saw and grind at things. Oops. I think that just kicked me out. Yep, it did. Oops. Okay, folks. I'll just pop back in. There we go. Sort of pushing the limits of airplay at school here. I wanted to get this recorded for you. They'll have sawing and grinding mouth parts. And an ant bite can be very painful. Also, ant venom is pretty nasty. There's only a few critters on our planet that are adapted to put up with that. So check out the mouth parts. It tells you what they do. It's their mode. Give it a second to catch up here. The next one, they'll be showing a moth with the tubular sort of mouth-like sucking proboscis. There's really no other way to indicate it. When you look at the ant here, while it's still up, I'm still waiting for this, it's fabulously designed, the little antennae, because they help facilitate all the sensation for the ant, sense the world around them, and it's also segmented. When you think about it, that makes sense because they have an exoskeleton. Okay, so since my little friend here isn't going to get going, I will just finish this off manually. Okay. So one moment, folks. Oops. That's not the one I wanted. I like to use Dropbox. It's a very handy little tool. And I've got all your stuff ready to go right down here. Chapter 28, Section 3. There we go. So let's move back a little bit. Let's move back. Okay, so there was our nasty ant with the bouty mouth parts. Specialized mouth parts, we talked about this, the tube-like proboscis, things like that. This would just tell you what it does. Sucks nectar. It's after something with that thing. When you look at a fly and its mouth parts, it's really disgusting with a fly because they practice external digestion. So they'll barf up their stomach contents, digestive juices, and the goal is to externally digest their food, and they use this, which is called a labia, okay, these lips, and they suck the food up. I know, it's pretty disgusting. It's why if you leave out fruit for a long period of time, you want to wash it off because the flies have come along and they're trying to digest it. Sorry to ruin your lunch. Movement and flight. Insects themselves, let's see if I can actually grab a tool here. I haven't tried this before, so I'm going to try it now. No. Yeah, I'll use the highlighter. When you look at their 3 pairs of legs, right, we get that idea. Okay. Walking, jumping. This one here, the legs aren't adapted really for a jumping mode. Think a little further, grasshopper, right? This is more of a walker, a burrower, and yet, again, it's another kind of beetle. They may have adapted mouth parts. Mouth parts in a lot of these insects are a lot like limbs for grabbing and holding on to prey and tearing them apart, I guess, if you're an ant. Here's the 2 pairs of wings I was telling you about. It's highlighted, but let's do a little bit more. There you go. 2 pairs of wings made up of, that is not pronounced chitin, that is chitin. Okay, flexible carbohydrate. And flight, once insects got on land, the ability to fly gave them an extraordinarily extended range. And the insects that could fly got new habitat, found new food sources, went after the plants. It's pretty smart. They have an adapted set of wings. This is a rhinoceros beetle. These protect their wings just when they're burrowing around on the land. This is a cicada over here, and a beautiful set of wings. Not quite as well protected, but they'll have 2 sets. That's pretty indicative. Metamorphosis, we'll plow right through this. There's two types. You've got incomplete and you've got complete. And what it just matters what's happening with the babies. Do they look different while they're metamorphosizing? Do they completely change? Now look, as a human being, you go through incomplete metamorphosis. You look like a human the whole time, right? You don't look different than a human. Your metamorphosis is incomplete. But if you totally changed, completely changed, it would be complete metamorphosis. So this is kind of like us. Here's incomplete. We have these little stages. Now some of these stages are called instars, but the immature forms are called nymphs. So you go to egg, nymph, the nymph grows, gets larger, and you get to the adult phase. But if you look at it, in each case in this metamorphosis, the metamorphosis hasn't been complete, the critter's just gotten bigger. Okay? So incomplete metamorphosis is really easy to pick up. But when you look at more complete kind of forms of metamorphosis, we'll look at in a minute, that's a different case. The nymphs might look a little bit different in coloration once the eggs are laid by the adult. They might look a little different. You might find exoskeletons of these around water sources when you go fishing. Not hard to find these guys. But largely, it's just a baby version of the final one. Pretty straightforward, I think. The immature phase here is shown in green. Adult, not so long. So the adult phase is really quite short. There's a lot of growing going on here. But incomplete metamorphosis, let's highlight that, it's a total change. Oops, haha. Let's try that. There we go. So I like to say egg larva. Now this is often called a larval phase, but here they're just using a newer title. So egg, nymph, pupa, adult. But you could say egg, larva, pupa, adult. And this is where they go into that specialized cocoon we've all heard about, right? And they undergo hormonal surges and they turn into something new. The larva goes in here, and with our tent caterpillars around town, this is not a surprise. You'll find them in their little fuzzy tombs as they undergo change, and they'll pop out as adults. I sometimes like to observe these. I go and check out what's going on in there to see if I can see changes. You know, they are a hassle, but it is quite an amazing thing that's going on in there. And I've said it many times, it's an everyday miracle. This is why they feed and eat so much food around town. Our tent caterpillars need a heck of a lot of nutrition to go through these phases, much less to go through this, because they stop eating when they enter this phase. So you can understand why. Here we go. So this is complete metamorphosis. Egg, larva, also known as nymphs, pupa, and pupa is just I'll go back here. Egg, this would be larva, so you see that there's two ways of describing us. Pupa ends up sort of in a sort of like a chrysalis phase. They enter their little tomb. There we go. So it's going through sort of its last change. The pupa would be right before it becomes an adult. So there's your ladybug life cycle. I know one group that's doing a ladybug project. This would be good to report on, I would think. Hint, hint. Insect communication. Round this out. Insects communicate pretty well using all the senses. If you ever look at a firefly, they have a special glowing protein in their butt. And that protein is an enzyme, and it's luciferase. Once it's activated, they use sort of a Morse code, a little flashing symbol in the sky to communicate with each other. And the patterns themselves help insects to communicate. I don't think you really realize just how social insects are. Insects have wars, they pass judgment on other insects, they communicate, they release pheromones or scents. Ants will do that to show the rest of the colony where the food is. They're very, very social. And if you don't follow the rules of the complex, you can find yourself thrown out or terminated. Don't lay an egg when you're not the dominant female. They will eat the egg and throw you out of the colony, if not kill you outright. There's a very interesting video on the course site called Insect Wars. You need to watch that. Sure, it's a little bit long, but when you look at what insects do, they raid and they pillage and they destroy and they pass judgment. They communicate, and they can be very, very brutal. So insects form these societies, and as a whole, they do better than as individuals. So kind of smart. We got up to the point of being multicellular. Now the multicellular organisms are getting together and forming multicellular colonies to do an even better job. Hey folks, that's no surprise. Fish form what we call schools. It's an advantage to be a part of a group. It can come with a lot of peer pressure too. There's a neat little bit here on communication in the honeybee. What I think I'll do is post a YouTube video so you get a better sense of this. But when honeybees fly out and they go to find, or they fly out and they find a really great area of flowers, they will communicate the directions, not with Google Maps or Apple Maps or something like that, but through this very interesting little waggle dance they do. I am not going to get into the waggle dance too much, but what I will say is this waggle dance is all relative to the sun. So I'm going to post a separate video called the waggle dance, and I'll have you watch that because it takes more time than I can really give you kind of do it justice with right now. Suffice it to say, I will plant one seed. It's all about proximity to the hive and how the insect is flying relative to the sun. They use what's called the normal, which is sort of the straight line, the direction in which you're going. And then from the straight line, they'll do the little variances. The direction of their dance, depending on how far they go, will say how far away the food source was and what angle you need to take when you fly out of the hive. And that's why the other little insects follow behind them. Because as they practice the waggle dance, they get a sense of the geography that they'll have to fly over to get to this amazing field of flowers. If you've seen the bee movie, well, you've seen this. Okay, 10:08. I managed to fit that in. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for listening, and this has been a shorter one. Have a good one, Mr. B, and I'm out.